Hi, Olivia.
Hey, Micah.
Hi, Steph.
Hi, Micah.
And hi, everybody. We are the League of Moveable Type, the first open source font foundry. You might know us from the weekly Typographic podcast and newsletter, but we're coming to you live from TypeWknd this weekend. I'm Micah. I'm joining you from New York State.
I'm Olivia. I'm joining you from Brooklyn, New York.
And I'm Steph, and I'm joining you from Melbourne, Australia.
And we are here to share a few of our favorite talks that we loved and give you a couple that you can look forward to tomorrow. What a first day.
Very cool.
Totally.
Olivia, do you want to kick us off and tell us what some of your favorites were?
Yeah, absolutely. Really interesting. I watched TypeWknd last year, and this year it just continues to impress. So the first talk I wanted to talk about was Navigating the Process, Research Methodologies for Designing in Non-Native Scripts by Natalie Snodgrass. Overall, it's a great deep dive into the very extensive process of designing an unfamiliar or non-native script. I think a thing that more and more type designers are being tasked with these days. So very topical, very relevant. It really kind of looks at typography from an anthropological point of view. So talking about how typography carries constructed meanings of culture and, how it's important if you are designing a script for a culture that you're not aware of, that you really do your research. In a survey of designers that, design for non-native scripts, they said that oftentimes designing for a non-native script meant 90% research for your complete time and then 10% designing. A crazy fact that I thought was super relevant. Lots of great, beautiful gems within this talk. And then there was a couple other talks that stood out to me that examined bringing historical letter forms design to life that I found interesting. The first one was Enrico Martinez, Un rescate tipográfico del México Novo Hispano by Pedro Sosa. And hopefully I got the pronunciation right. And the second one was Calligraphic Typesetting, Exploration of Religious Scriptures to Resurrect the Emotional and Spiritual Connection Originally Existed in the Traditional Penmanship by Abhay Verma. Both of these focused on, historical letter forms. The first one was about Enrico Martinez, not someone that's necessarily in traditional type and history design textbooks, but was a very influential designer and printer and master of all trades in Mexico and America. And so Pedro worked on a revival of this type in a really beautiful process video showing all the steps that he took to kind of maintain its integrity. And then Abhay Verma talked about digitization of calligraphy from a religious scripture. And aside from the letter forms, he talks about how print and production methodologies can really impact the effect of the final product and how successful it is at recreating a period in time. So both projects, I think, highlighted works that we're not going to find in our typical type and design history, and I really appreciated that.
I love that. That is fun. That is interesting. All right, shoot, Steph, you're up.
So a couple of the talks I really enjoyed today was, first up was Designing a Feminist Devangari Typeface by Shriti Mitra. And one of the things I loved about this was she was inspired by the UN Sustainable Development Goals, and particularly goal number 5, which is around equality for all genders and across the gender spectrum as well. And she talked about how the type characteristics we often talk about have got a real masculine or feminine connotation to them, and how we maybe need to move away from that and can challenge that and question that as we're designing typefaces, but also when we're using typefaces as designers in our designs. So one of the things that was really interesting about this is that in Devangari's script, there's lots of curves and there's no serifs actually as well. So some of those characteristics that we talk about when it comes to Latin typefaces change quite a lot when it comes to different scripts, which was really interesting to me as I wasn't familiar with Devangari's script. Some of the different weights that she then talks about as well also had different masculine and feminine connotations. So she actually went and did a bit of a survey around and some study around what type of characteristics, what type of typefaces did people see as more masculine and more feminine, and then starting to boil that down into the specific elements of that. And then she developed a typeface that brought some of those together and actually really almost 50-50 matched the masculine and the feminine elements of those characteristics into a typeface then that was a lot more neutral and could have maybe different ways of describing it, which I thought was really interesting and something that we've been talking about obviously at the League quite recently. It's come up on a couple of episodes just even in the last few weeks as well. The other one I really enjoyed, which actually links to really nicely to one, Olivia, you were just talking about, is Balancing Type Design with Language Learning by Michelle Devlin. And she was talking about how you can learning typography, but also learning the language at the same time. And I think the key point from that I found really interesting was when you're learning the language as well as learning the script and the system, you start to see more than just the abstract shapes of the letter forms and of the characters and of the glyphs, etc. They start to mean something a little bit more. So it was a real reminder that if you are ever developing a typeface and you are bringing in different characters or addressing the typeface design so that you can include different scripts, it's important to actually understand the context of those scripts rather than just them as abstract shapes. Micah, what were your favorites?
Well, I actually had two favorites from today. They were two very interesting and very different talks. The first was Letters from Home. And it was this like beautifully creative, artistic effort to both find and create Punjabi scripts from everyday things in the speaker's life. It was very human, and she kind of described it as like the project. She used the words honest and uncluttered, which I thought was very interesting. And she had some history that was super interesting about Northwest, South Indian writing systems and kind of like some of the differences in those different cultures. So the speaker, her name was Amrit. She was very intelligent, and I think she said she was 17 years old and doing these like beautiful, creative, deep artistic projects, which I just thought was amazing. And she did an amazing job too of animating visuals to go along with her talk. So I think, she's talking mostly here about like the different scripts in Indian cultures, and it's kind of both through history and geography. And sort of her main point is that like homogenizing these things into one Indian script is not really helpful for anybody. And there's a lot of beauty in the differences, which I just thought was really cool, and so cool that she was like so young and so well spoken and did such a great job. And then my other favorite talk, totally different side of the spectrum. The talk was called The Research of Tool Making Towards Intuitive Variable Font Specimens. It was kind of technical, and it was pretty detailed. And so it was sort of, this team had already designed a very complex variable font with a ton of different axes and like different directions that it could go. And they wanted to make sort of a specimen that did that justice. And so they made this like super interactive tool where you could sort of click into things and make decisions and like move around in this imaginary space to discover the different variations. And in that, the speaker, Roni, was talking about kind of their thought process in how to do this. And she made a super interesting point that the problems of too much choice are starting to seep into the space of variable fonts, because the tweaking options for variations are limitless. And so we kind of need to start designing UIs to enable playing with that without feeling like we have too much choice. I thought that was a very interesting point. And she also made the point, too, that like designing for experts is very different than designing for casual users. And in this case, like designing for designers, they're experts. And so designers are coming in with sort of like pre-made preferences and more desire for options than a casual user or a normal human would want, but still have that same problem of too much choice comes with paralysis. So it was a really interesting, detailed case study, how they sort of built this interactive site and the thoughts behind it. I thought that was pretty darn cool.
We're already seeing a really interesting theme around the globalization of typography. I feel like we all travel to different parts of the world with all of our different perspectives and favorite videos. So I know that's going to continue as the days go by, but already exciting that we're hearing all these new different perspectives. I think that's a beautiful thing about TypeWknd.
And it's so cool that there's like such an interesting mix of super detailed and technical with like historical and geographical and sort of fun and playful. It's a really awesome variety.
And while we're talking about going around the world, I do have to give a special notice or mention to Wayne Thompson from Australia, who does a talk actually today in day one around creating your country's national font. And that was a really interesting talk about creating a font for the national broadcaster here in Australia.
That's pretty cool.
I really liked that one.
It's good. It was really good.
All right, so Steph, give us a tease of what some of your favorites are tomorrow that we can talk about.
Tomorrow, similar theme, looking forward to going around the world. So going to Morocco tomorrow, going over to India again, going to look through some trash as well. So looking forward to a couple of those, particularly the one around Creating from Kupai by Jayashree Sridhar, who is talking about finding typography treats in trash.
All right, Olivia, what are you excited about tomorrow?
Oh, there's a couple I'm super psyched about. The first one is Fonts for Video Games, Overlooked and Underserved by Justin Penner. That's so fascinating. I don't even know how the heck fonts work in video games. Like, please tell me. Excited about that one. And then also really excited about All Set, about characters, glyphs, and which set to include in your font from Nina Bothoff. Sounds very neat.
That's cool. All right. I've got a couple too. I mean, I'm very excited about one called An Oasis of Type, which was kind of like examining Indian culture and making typography with kind of the oppressive nature of Western modernism, which was pretty intense and pretty cool. And then there's definitely one that I'm going to mention tomorrow about faux Indian scripts that are Latin, that look like Indian, and it's sort of like the Comic Sans of India. It's going to be interesting.
That sounds very cool.
Love it.
All right, hope everybody had an awesome day, and we will catch you tomorrow. Doodle-a-doot.
Doodle-a-doot.